So I'm starting the recording now and welcome those who have arrived. I see people are flowing in. Thank you for coming this evening to our virtual panel. I'm going to get right into the introduction so that I can turn it quickly over to our four fantastic panelist presentations tonight. I'm really looking forward to their presentations and the conversation that I know their presentations will generate. The title of this panel is Carceral Storytelling Collaborations, and a key goal is to highlight how humanity workers can leverage their position and resources within learning communities to create bridges to advocates and impacted communities outside the classroom or museum in order to bring carceral storytelling to public audiences. My co-organizer and one of the presenters today, Dr. Felicia Henry Conte, has inspired me and I know others on this panel deeply with a phrase she's repeated throughout our conversations. The story of incarceration is the story of our nation. We and others posit that there's no aspect of civic life or our history that incarceration does not touch. And yet the spaces and experiences of incarceration are intentionally obscured from public scrutiny in ways that harm us all, but most disproportionately harm the most marginalized. So this panel is part of a larger project Felicia and I have been working on to encourage humanities scholars who have an investment in facilitating public dialogue and interpreting history to contribute to challenging this condition of obfuscation through engaging in collective storytelling projects and through learning from leaders from impacted communities. So with that, I'm really excited to welcome the first panelists. Jeff Ludwig is the Director of Education at the Seward House Museum, which is the historic home in Auburn, New York of the 19th century politician William Henry Seward, who among other roles served as Governor of New York and Lincoln's Secretary of State. Jeff holds a PhD in history from the University of Rochester and previously taught in the SUNY system. And for the last 3 years, he's been exploring the intersections between the Seward family and the Auburn Correctional Facility, which is the oldest continuously operating prison in the United States, not just New York State. T. Romdeo is an associate at the Correctional Association of New York, an organization designated by law to provide independent oversight of prisons in New York State to promote transparency and accountability, safeguard human and civil rights of incarcerated people, identify and provoke a response to harmful practices and policies, and promulgate information that supports reform. Previously, T worked for the Queen's Hospital as a community health worker, where he received referrals from the medical staff and worked with patients to identify barriers to their health goals and provide them with resources to eliminate those barriers. T earned a BA from Bard College and an MPS from the New York Theological Seminary. So thank you, Jeff and T, and welcome.
Thank you, Diana. I am not the first of us to speak, but I do have the pleasure of sharing my screen and a very small slide deck that T and I worked on together. Oops. I hit the wrong button. And here you can just see our contact information. Please do feel free to reach out. I'm so pleased to be here today on behalf of the Seward House Museum, and it feels like a reunion of colleagues that I've been fortunate enough to learn from a great deal the last 3 years. And foremost among them, our friends at CANI and T. I believe you are our first speaker, and I'll move to your slide.
Thank you for the introduction, Diana. Jeff, let me just start off by saying thanks for the opportunity to be here and take part in this discussion today. Let me start off by saying that CANI has a very long and tortuous history. It was founded in 1844 by people who were concerned about prison conditions. The person that led the effort was a New York State Circuit Judge, John W. Edmonds. Since its founding, CANI has gone through a number of iterations, including a name change. At one time, CANI was the Prison Association of New York. Now is the Correctional Association of New York. For this purpose, I want to focus on the Auburn Correctional Facility, which is, I would say it's a example of what was happening at the time of its founding. Auburn was opened in 1816 and established the Auburn system, American penal method, which required that incarcerated individuals work in groups during the day and be kept in silence and solitary confinement at night. Silence was strictly enforced at all times. I just want to highlight a few things, take note of a few things. One, incarcerated individuals had no right and no opportunity for comfort. Two, they had to work for free, making a host of things, including nails, shoes, boats, carpenter tools, steam engines, and so forth. And three, as you can imagine, several methods of violence and coercion were used to keep people silent and working. And silent is a key word here because we are talking about storytelling. I want to emphasize that. Silence and working was maintained through lashes, flagging, waterboarding, and so forth. While many supported the abuse because they benefit from the system and the incarcerated population's free labor, others turned a blind eye to what was happening. But some deplored the treatment of the incarcerated population. Those individuals founded PANI, which is CANI now, and supported its vision. One such person was William Stewart, and Jeff will speak to that.
Thank you so much, T. And for anyone who's not familiar with the Seward House Museum, it's a mid-sized historic house museum in the Finger Lakes of upstate New York in Cayuga County. It's a beautiful place, idyllic scenery, and there's a lot to celebrate about the proud and rich history of the community where I serve today. It is, of course, the home of William Henry Seward and his family. As Diane has told us, Seward is remembered perhaps best for being the architect of the Alaska Purchase, aka Seward's Folly. He served as Secretary of State to President Lincoln during the Civil War and played a crucial role in that. His home was a stop on the Underground Railroad, and his family sold a 7-acre farm to Harriet Tubman. In 1859, she made a life for herself in freedom, the last half century of her life by choice in Auburn. It's the birthplace of sound on film technology, and for these and many other reasons, Auburn is self-styled, and proudly history's hometown. But as T's already mentioned, an undercurrent that runs alongside all these uplifting narratives is that Auburn is also home to the oldest continuously operating prison in the United States. And often these two things don't coexist well. They are sort of in separate spheres, almost like there's two worlds, and there's something of an act of cognitive dissonance to live and work in Auburn, to be in sight of this massive prison complex day in and day out. But what goes on beyond those walls is often invisible until enough time goes by and the walls themselves can become invisible. The Seward House Museum is a place where many visitors come because they're interested in American history. They're drawn to stories of freedom and equality. It's a part of the legacy of the family. But as we began to learn a few years ago, it's always more complicated than that. Auburn's history is also underwritten, in unfree labor, dispossession, stories of the wholesale removals of people, enslavement, and the Auburn prison complex. And the Seward family's hands are not entirely clean from this. One of the things that we learned as we began to pull on threads a few years ago to wonder about the relationship between our family that we talk about every day and this prison that's also a major part of Auburn's history is that the man who built the home we call Seward House today was a guy named Elijah Miller. He's a founding figure in Auburn, a surveyor, and an early profiteer from the Auburn system who exploited and used that labor to gain wealth. And so the Seward family has a long and complicated history with that prison from its outset. And as William Henry Seward, born in 1801, rose to political prominence, he was often, though we forget it today, a prison reformer, though he has a very complicated and at times contradictory relationship with that prison, which helps enrich him. Also, he quite radically attacks the prison system. He's often a critic of mass incarceration and the Auburn style. As we began to do this research, we met wonderful connections within the Association for Cultural Sites and Museums, people who studied carceral history, scholars as well. But we were also connected to CANI because, of course, they're doing tremendous work. And we soon learned their organization and ours share a common origin point. Seward had just finished serving as governor of New York in the early 1840s when Canny was founded. We can see Seward here. And he was recognized as a supporter and champion. He was invited to take part. And here from the Canny Archives is a letter, I'm sure it's very hard for those of you at home to see, in which Seward extols what they're doing, counts himself among their number, cheers the work that they're doing as well. And to read some of Seward's early reports on conditions in places like Auburn or Sing Sing, they're strikingly modern. At one point, he says, "This is the best we can do," referring to what was happening in Sing Sing. He said we should abolish the prison system. But of course, this is not the best we can do. Now, there's good reasons why a lot of these stories have been all but forgotten, because there's so much else to wrap your minds around with the Seward family legacy. Our mission the last 3 years has been to bring these complicated stories back and to, as we'll talk about soon, have a broader conversation with our own community and anyone else who wants to listen and be a part of it about why these stories, as Felicia say, matter so much, why the stories of mass incarceration are the stories of our nation. And a little picture here of the exhibit we opened. Anyone who ever finds himself in our region, please come visit. And T, I've taken too much time. Please, back to you.
That's okay. That was real informative. Appreciate that. This grant, which is the Post-Incarceration Humanities Partnership Grant and the collaboration with Stewart House Museum, encouraged Canny to experiment with oversight's role in mediating change. This seems a daunting task because we choose to engage in carceral storytelling in a highly conflictual place. Auburn is known as history's hometown, including the resting place of Harriet Tubman, and as Prison City. In this polar place, we cloak ourselves in the humanities and engage in carceral storytelling. I must say, given the historical context of this city, the Stewart House Museum accomplished an extraordinary feat by bringing together people from an array of disciplines and backgrounds and engage them in dialogue. Jeff will speak about how he did that, about the exhibit, and about the panel discussion. But I want to reflect a bit about the prison visit itself. Based on prior discussions, it was evident that people were not aware of the things happening behind the walls. The stories they heard were slanted ones. The humanity of those behind the walls was not a conversational piece. To get the most out of this project, community members had to visit the facility and speak to the incarcerated population. During the course of the visit, I could see that people were engaged, diligent, emotional, and friendly. Yes, friendly, because Auburn is a small place, a small town, and people interact. I also noticed that the visit was difficult. It was obvious that people were struggling to grasp what they were seeing, hearing, smelling, and so forth. After the visit, we decided to meet at the Prison City Brewery and chat about the day's event. I noticed that people were reflective, emotional, and upset. If there was cognitive dissonance before, you can notice the internal struggles. And going back to this notion of history's hometown versus prison city, and the complicity and harm done behind the walls. We eventually interviewed a few participants and noticed a shift in perspective. One person said that the current incarceration practice is barbaric and not rehabilitative. Another said that she is motivated to bring healing to the whole community. Yet another said that seeing young people in mental health housing was heartbreaking because they are just babies. That's just a few observation and reflection as a result of the visit and people engaging and interacting and discussion disturbing and troubling topics. Pass it back to Jeff.
Thank you, T. And certainly so much of the work that our organizations have been doing together for the last 3 years have been organization-wide efforts from leadership and staff at Canny to Stewart House Museum. And so this relationship between Canny and William Seward was grounded and forged in history back to the 1840s, when both William Seward and Canny were beginning their work in the world of carceral reform. But we didn't want to simply linger in the past, but to bring those stories forward into the future. We are now almost in the third year of collaboration with funding, as T's mentioned, from Humanities New York, which included, of course, a monitoring visit facilitated by Canny, which has this independent oversight capacity, and bringing our community within prison spaces for an entire day. The goal, as we'll talk about, is for our next few slides are about the future, but then the present was not simply a matter of sending community members of all backgrounds, people who were local business owners or thought and faith leaders, working in school and government, but also to sort of bring out these experiences to sort of try to bridge that divide between these two Auburns, Prison City and history's hometown, through open dialogue events. And so these are pictures of Canny and Seward House staff inviting members of our community to gather at a neighboring site to us, the Equal Rights Heritage Center, for conversations, just open discourse and dialogue. And I'm pleased to say that at the same time we were doing this, you'll soon hear from Josh and Kristin. We were working with the University of Rochester and expanding parameters and partnerships. And as we talk about the future, a one-off conversation isn't enough. Work needs to be ongoing. And the Stewart House Museum and Canny are committed to growing this relationship through good times and bad, funded and non-funded. And that's why I'm grateful to be here today to have this chance to talk about it with everybody in this Zoom. It's been a part of our transformational work. And so as we get into our next slides, I think T and I are both excited to talk about the future of this humanities-based partnership. Excuse me, and back to you, T.
Okay. So yes, this project and the collaboration promise to enrich the discussion around criminal justice reform. In this context, specifically regarding Auburn, the city of the town of Auburn. We have made some good strides in the effort to counter cognitive dissonance, skewed perspectives, and uninformed preconceived notions. Yet the promise is unfulfilled, we would say. We need to have more visits, more traffic to the museum to see the exhibit, engage more people, and encourage them to become more aware. Ultimately, projects, initiative, collaborations such as this need to take root in other prison cities. There are a number of other prison cities that work like that Seward House is doing and other people are doing, need expanding and more attention. And I will pass it back to Jeff.
And I think we are running low on time, so keeping our gaze on the future. This is just a piece. Canny recently celebrated its 180th anniversary and invited Seward House to reflect with it. And you can see the subtitle here after Seward's own words about what we owed to those most vulnerable, a constant and jealous supervision. It's the role of Canny to fulfill that and all of us to fulfill that. But the question was, what could Canny and a 19th century historic house museum in upstate New York possibly have in common? If I was asked that question 3 years ago, I would have probably said, what's Canny? And now I can't believe how much I found we'd had in common. So if anyone is out there representing an organization that thinks that they don't have a role to play or a story to tell, I'll remind you again of what Felicia has said. Mass incarceration is the story of our nation, and it affects everybody, and particularly in Auburn. I look forward to the next rounds of monitoring visits with Canny and for the far larger community dialogue events that we have planned. I do want to share in the chat when I can drop my screen share, just a brief article for anyone interested, sort of a process story of this partnership and the work. I haven't talked much about our exhibit, but this work has grown larger in scope than that. For anybody tuning in who might want to read more and understand our methodology, our process, and some more sort of reflections on lessons learned. But here again, myself and T, I know we'd be pleased to answer questions at the end of this, but also to be in touch with anyone here today. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jeff and T. I know I have, questions. I want to hear more about the details of the prison visit. and the community members and more about all of that. I was going to say to audience members, we're going to do a Q&A at the end, but feel free to drop a question in the chat at any time. I'm going to keep a list of questions for us to explore at the conclusion of the panels. So our next speaker is Terrell Mohammed. You might notice I'm offering slightly extended intros. I want to emphasize the breadth of experience that are represented by the panelists, and I have a particularly extended intro for our next panelist, Terrell Mohammed, who comes with so much experience. Mohammed is a beloved activist, mentor, advocate, father, friend, and movement builder. He currently works as a senior advocate for the Alliance of Families for Justice, whose mission is to support, empower, and mobilize families and individuals impacted by the criminal justice system so they can marshal their collective power to create a just world. Mohammed earned his GED at the Attica Correctional Facility in 1982, his Bachelor of Arts from Syracuse University in 1988, and his master's degree from the New York Theological Seminary in 2004, all while serving 26 years and 11 months of a 20 years to life prison sentence in the New York State prison system. Mohammed has been on the ground floor of dozens of advocacy campaigns working to better the lives of those impacted by the criminal legal system and minimize injustice. To name just a few, he was a member of the Halt Solitary campaign since 2012, where he joined a team of advocates drafting bill language and campaigning relentlessly for a law to strictly limit solitary confinement within the New York prison system, which passed in 2021. Mohammed was also an instrumental force in passing the Raise the Age law, which raised the age of criminal responsibility to 18 years old, prohibited 16 and 17-year-olds from being housed in adult prisons and jails. He was also a key collaborator in the passage of the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. He was a longtime part of the team at CANI as well, and is a founding member of the New York chapter of the Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement, founding member of Release Aging People from Prisons, and has been interviewed by numerous documentaries, articles, and news segments, including the Marshall Project's documentary We Are Witnesses and Bill Moyer's Rikers and American Jail. So thank you, Mohammed, for joining us.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Felicia. Thank you all of and those of you who took time out of your busy schedule to be with us tonight. Storytelling. What's important about the storytelling in the work that I do and how it's used is the families and the loved ones of incarcerated men and women. A lot of times, their stories are what compel people to see those who are incarcerated as human beings. In telling these stories and getting this message out, one of the major things we have to be aware of is language. When the correctional staff, as well as the media, talk about people that's incarcerated, terms are used as inmate, ex-con, convict. These are all denigrated terms and definition to kill the humanity of the person or the people they're describing. This way, we can do anything to them without having any fear or repercussion or shame or moral compass. So I always try to bring the humanity in the storytelling. We do that through op-ed pieces. We do that through town halls, rallies, and protests. We do that in little gathering at churches and organizations. We'll do it on a street corner, wherever is available to get the message out. Whether we're going to get people that's receptive, it's not really of the issue. People need to hear it. They need to hear what happened in Attica and prior to Attica. As Jeff was describing, CANI has over 100 years of documentation that shows abuse, and torture, and torment. Over 100 years. And you would figure after over 100 years of documenting these incidents and having this as a record, people will have a different frame of mind or a different feeling or a different view towards incarceration. But it hasn't really made a dent. We're still called inmates. We're still called convicts. We're still called names that really is masking the reality of what people really want to say. They just use those terms or the euphemism. But they really want to say nigger. They don't want to say inmate. They don't want to say of your number, 80B 1598, convict. They really want to use that terminology. But because they have now become sophisticated, and they know how to dilute language to make it seem fair seeming, their message gets out because they control the media more so than those who are advocates. But the advocates use what they have, and we continue to humanize those that are incarcerated and those that have not been incarcerated, but probably have a traumatic history of mental health. Even though they have mental health, they're human beings. And we have to continue to remind ourselves that there are people first. Prior to anything else you want to call them, there are people first. And this is the story we have to get out. This is the incarcerated stories that's right now in real time, because we are watching what's happening with the state and Kathy Hochul and the security forces, as well as with the advocate. The governor herself has said there's something terribly wrong. There's something terribly wrong, that something has to be changed, and it's systemic. Oh, that message is getting out now. That systemic change is needed. But before, it was falling on deaf ears. It took a strike. It took several deaths. It took a video. It took all of these things to help bolster the storytellings that we've been telling for years, and people have been denying us. So we have all of these things today, and we have what you call competing stories. The competing story is correction officers are not safe, and they're understaffed, and they're afraid for their health. The other story is those that are incarcerated are being abused, tortured, and forgotten about. But the silent story is this: something needs to be done. Everyone agrees something needs to be done. What? We have to edge them on with what? Because they'll stay stuck and stagnated because they're comfortable with a system that don't work. So it's up to the advocates and those that really care about this quandrum to speak up with ideals that are of the 21st century. We cannot continue to do what we've been doing and thinking we're getting new results. We need young people to think about what is incarceration. We need young people to think about how their future going to be served with justice, or it's going to be a moral compass, or we're going to just have policies and bylaws and amendments, or we're just going to really do what's right and see people as human beings and treat them as such. I don't mean to belabor the point, but these stories are very important, because the only way we can bring change is having dialogue. And dialogue is going to be rough. Dialogue and dealing with truth is not going to be comfortable. We got to wrestle with this. I'm willing to wrestle with it. Thank you all for your attention tonight. I want to give my colleagues some breath of time, and I appreciate the time that you've given me tonight, Diane and Felicia. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, and for that focus on dialogue, discomfort, humanization as like essential parts of thinking about the carceral storytelling and action, and attention and advocacy. Our next presenters are Kristin Doughty and Joshua Dubler from the University of Rochester. Kristin is Associate Professor of Anthropology. Her first book is Remediation in Rwanda, Grassroots Legal Forums. Joshua Dubler is Associate Professor of Religion and the Director of the Rochester Education Justice Initiative. And he's the author of Down in the Chapel, Religious Life in an American Prison, co-author of Break Every Yoke, Religious Justice and Abolition of Prisons. And together they pursue research on the everyday impacts of mass incarceration in upstate New York through a collaborative research project and a co-taught course, Cultural Politics of Prison Towns. This work led to a traveling exhibit going upstate that has been shown in Rochester, Auburn, and Brockport, supported by a 3-year NSF Cultural Anthropology Senior Researcher Award. So thank you, guys.
All right, sorry, just making sure. Am I sharing properly now? And I'm unmuted. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I am going to take the lead here and start us off. And Josh, you're not on my screen, but if you are, you can just flag me down or interrupt me when you're ready to jump in. And I'll try to keep us moving quickly. So thank you so much to everyone for including us in this and for your comments so far. It's really a pleasure to be here. So this project is a bit different from the other two that we've heard about, but I think it intersects in ways that to me, I think are really meaningful and that I hope come out in our discussion. This project emerges for me and Josh out of collaborations that we've been doing this for about 5 or 6 years, and we had been collaborating for a few years before that, most notably on REGI, the Rochester Education Justice Initiative that Diana just mentioned. Josh is the faculty director of that. It's Rochester's College and Prison program. I've taught, I was actually teaching in Attica this semester until the prison strike, the wildcat strike, booted us out of the facility. We've also been rabble-rousers in a variety of projects on campus, from trying to push for the disarming of public safety to working with students who were speaking out in support of Palestine last year in the encampments, to currently supporting our graduate students who are now on strike. So Josh and I have a working relationship that thinks about sort of politics in relation to our scholarship. Outside of just this project. This project is also collaborative with our students. The research that is behind this project going upstate is connected to a class that we taught, as Anna just mentioned, where we ran the class and the research project more broadly as a collaborative ethnographic research project, where students in our class, undergraduate students that we taught once a semester for 5 or 6 years, would be going into these towns such as Auburn, as town of Attica, other towns around us within sort of a 1 to 2 hour radius, in order to do work to try to understand this question of how the saturation of prisons in our region shapes everyday life. And then it's also collaborative with our neighbors, with our colleagues, with our formerly incarcerated activist friends and colleagues, with people with loved ones who are incarcerated, and with people who live and work in these towns. I'll just throw out here for you all a quote by Ruth Wilson Gilmore, but and you all can read, so I'll let you read what's there. But this, I think we all in this audience and on this panel understand the scope of carceral geographies, and I loved the framing that you gave earlier. Felicia's quote: "The story of incarceration is the story of our nation," and that's really our point. And that therefore we want our students and ourselves and our colleagues to be thinking with what are the sort of empirical traces of that, and how can we map the many ways and trace empirically the many ways that incarceration shapes everyday life in ways that are perhaps unexpected, so that we can then begin to unravel those threads, provoke additional conversations, and begin to imagine a world where we configure space differently and configure punishment and something called justice differently. This is at one level a story of the whole country, as we've all said multiple times. It's an American story, but it has particular manifestations in our region. This is the Department of Corrections map for New York State. We are in Rochester, which you can see in the sort of light green area to the left. And from our campus where Josh and I work and from which we get our paycheck, within 2 hour radius, there are somewhere between 30 and 35 prisons, jails, immigration detention facilities, juvenile detention facilities, et cetera. Here's a map that one of our students put together to show the range, just the high saturation of these of human caging in our region. And this becomes the point of departure for us, thinking both with the specificity of our region, with Auburn, as Jeff and T talked about, with Attica, the location of the notorious uprising, but also, as we've sort of thought through the whole project, it's both a story of the particularities of our region, but also one that we think expands more broadly. It's also a place, this is a map from the Prison Policy Initiative, where if it used to be that where we sit in New York State, that people thought about the fact that most incarcerated people upstate came from downstate, that's not the case anymore. So where I'm sitting right now in my office, and where I know Jeff at least is sitting, where Josh is sitting, we are in a region where many people who live around us earn money working in prisons, and many people either go into prison from this region, have loved ones who do, or have loved ones who come home. So we're a place that both sends people in and out of prisons, and we're a place where people earn a living from it. And so that really frames the question of how and why, and what can we do with this research and work to get people to think about that really critically, and to denaturalize something that perhaps they hadn't seen before, and perhaps help them to see something that they then begin to challenge and think anew. And not to just simply think about, but to begin to move to the activism work that Mohammed was speaking about a moment ago. So again, Josh, my current screen, I can't see you, so I feel like I'm talking over you, but
No, you're killing it. Like,
okay, I was gonna say I'll pass the mic to you at any point. Okay, now you've shown up now that you spoke, but I'll say I'll just flag, really briefly. So we ended up, Josh and I are academics who write like boring books, but we didn't want to write a boring book about this. And with our students, we came up with the idea of doing this more in an exhibit form. We are not museum studies people, so this was a little bit going out on a limb, but has been really productive and meaningful on a lot of levels. These are the posters that a graduate student of ours developed for our second and third exhibits, one with these are the one with that Jeff alluded to with the Seward House. I'll flag for you in just a second, but the idea was to try to think about doing these exhibits in a way that would provoke ongoing conversation, so that we would bring additional people into our sphere, into this broader conversation at a very basic level, get people to challenge what they thought they knew but where they lived, but then also build additional coalitions over time, and perhaps help to begin to build additional alliances and collectivities, because I think both of us come to this project as sort of abolitionists and want to think about what are the alternative futures that we can imagine, where these towns don't need to rely on these prisons within their midst, but where we can think, and we need to think our sort of premise is that we need to think with the people in those towns in order to avoid a zero-sum game, although that feels increasingly challenging in these current moments, but how to think through, how to use the work we're doing, the research and teaching from where we sit, to provoke these additional conversations and additional activist work. So the form of the exhibit, I'll say very quickly, is to have objects and images that our students had found predominantly in the work, and to pair those with field note excerpts, bits of text from their field notes from the interviews they did. So it's less a sort of didactic argument and more a provocation for additional thought. Josh, maybe I can hand it to you to talk a little bit about where our title came from while I switch my screen share to show our website.
Right. So, I mean, we're very fortunate to be at a comparatively resource-rich institution, and in the last decade, we've been able to do a lot of things. And this Rochester Education Justice Initiative, we have degree programs at 3 prisons in the area, associate's degrees and a BA at Attica, and we built this program up in the era where institutions like ours were like supportive of diversity work, and we'll see what the future holds. But it allowed us to make arguments about kind of liberal-friendly arguments about inclusion toward the decarceration of our campus, making space for formerly incarcerated folks on campus. And anyway, we were at one of these gatherings of teachers, administrators, students, community members, organizers, and we had one of the students that we were supporting, who was a student at Monroe Community College, had been reincarcerated, and we were talking about where he was, and so we're sitting in Rochester, New York, and someone said, "Is he still in county, or has he gone upstate?" Right, with upstate meaning into the state facility. And so, for us, it picks up, being from upstate, and this kind of the tension between the story of incarceration as a story of our nation, and then what Jeff and T were talking about the invisibilization, placing prisons out of always being somehow somewhere else. Even in the kind of we live in somewhere else, and even when you're in somewhere else, it's somewhere else. So trying to, that's what inspired the name of the exhibit.
Thank you, Josh. I'll just say a few more things, and I'm sorry for blurring the background here while you're talking, but I've brought us to the website goingupstate.org, which our grad student Danielle Ginevro beautifully built, that for anybody who wants to click through it later, that has an archive of each of the exhibits we've done. These are images of objects in situ, but then it also has each of the objects.
That's in the Seward House.
Sorry, yes, thank you. Yes, and this is in the Seward House. This is the exhibit that we did with Jeff that he alluded to earlier. I just thought maybe we could flag, Josh, I'll let you talk about, I was going to flag really quickly 2 really quick things, and then I'll let you maybe talk about something, and then we can close our time. But I just wanted to speak to Mohammed, what you were saying about stories from the inside and ways of linking them. I'm adding linking those stories from the outside. We've tried to do both. Our research is very much on the outside in the sense that, like, I teach inside, but I don't, quote, do research inside, because that isn't ethical. But we also have worked hard to when we have people who want to add to our stories, to encourage them to do so. So there's a few things here. This is a sweatshirt that one of our longtime friends and colleagues provided. That was her husband, who she built a life with her husband, who was incarcerated for nearly 3 decades throughout New York State. And when we asked if she wanted to contribute something, she contributed a sweatshirt of his that he had sent home with her, that she then used as a pillowcase for years while he was gone. And here's her quote about how that emerged. We have a series of letters from, again, another couple that kept their marriage alive found each other and kept their marriage alive across walls. And then this most notable one I'll add is that we have a typewriter that from Attica and 5 Points that was shared with us. And then this, I'll let you all read yourself, but a rock that from D Yard in Attica that one of our activists, allies, and friends brought to us and bequeathed to our exhibit. So even though this primary goal of the project isn't, there are many projects out there that are doing a better job and more systematic job than us, telling stories from the inside, predominantly ones that are driven by people who themselves are inside or were inside, and that's not our primary goal, but we have made efforts to ensure that those remain pieces of the story as well. Josh, you want me to scroll you?
Yeah, no, scroll me to the Attica crystals, because in some sense,
oh yeah.
I mean, this belongs to this kind of the long organizing, relationship building work that is the stuff of our lives, and that is organized around, I guess, decarcerating our community. And so it's being in community with folks for a long time that we end up with those objects. But as far as like our student research, and then I think, it tends to be more oblique and a little bit literary and a little bit weird. So these are crystals from this like crystal shop in Attica. And the students like fell in with the crystal shop owners, who also dabble in certain kinds of like healing and exorcism and stuff. And what they, the crystal shop owners in Attica, they're like, there's a real weird energy in this town. Right. There's a really weird energy in this town. And it's an energy that like emanates from the correctional facility. Right. And like the energy, like it infuses the community. Right. And they're describing it in these kind of metaphysical terms, what I think all of us on this call would think about in kind of sociological terms. And we understand how working at a correctional facility how that contributes to certain kinds of pathologies in the community. But anyway, most of the exhibit is of that order of thing. These things that are, the prison is kind of there on your peripheral vision. And, as the, you're right, it's in a country that, that cages so many, none of us are not touched by the prison. And then it's particularly true in, per capita in like our weird corner of Upstate.
I think I'll leave it at that, because if I keep going, I'll just like walk you through the whole thing and still be here 2 hours from now. So I'll stop it here. And I'm happy to discuss more later, but thanks so much. Josh, does that seem okay to wrap up?
Yeah, I think it's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And if you wanted to drop the link in the chat, I'm sure we'll all want to follow up on this. Yeah, I'm again so excited to follow up with questions for you guys about the project, along with the rest of the panel. But we have our final presentation. Felicia Henry Conte is an artivist-scholar whose research concentrates on the racialized and gendered aspect of the carceral state. She's currently an assistant professor at American University, whose research expertise includes race, ethnicity, gender, class, carceral studies, arts-based activism, critical criminology, and disasters in the environment. She's the founder of Behind the Walls, Between the Lines, a movement to deepen the awareness of the legacy of racial inequity in America, particularly in the criminal legal system, and inspire activism aimed at its dismantlement. And overall, her work as an artivist and scholar examines systems of power and advances creative solutions to promote the well-being of marginalized communities.
Hi, everybody. Such a pleasure to be here with these brilliant and amazing people. Every time we get together, I'm just always in awe and excited because I think that one thing that you should take away from this entire gathering is that there are many stories to tell. There are many stories to tell, and there are many ways to tell those stories, and many people who are involved in telling those stories or amplifying those stories. And I think one of the beauty of this gathering and all of the folks that are represented is that we have come to the place of, hey, here's a story that we want to tell or stories that we want to engage with. How do we do those things ethically? How do we do those in ways that actually amplifies them, actually dignifies them, actually humanizes them, and does not necessarily reinforce or replicate the same kinds of power dynamics that take away dignity or take away humanity from the folks who are experiencing these things? And so I was thinking about what I wanted to offer or what I wanted to kind of put in this space alongside my colleagues. And I think I want to talk specifically about some stories. And so we've talked a little like kind of broadly about the kinds of stories. We've talked about this kind of overarching experience of incarceration. And now I want to kind of drill it down, right? Because I don't know how it got attributed to me. I don't remember coming up with that phrase, the story of incarceration is the story of our nation. I think Jeff came up with it, but that's neither here nor there. But it is this mass story, right? And Kristin and Josh started talking about this idea of carceral geographies. And if you're not familiar, when we're talking about incarceration, we are not just talking about the very act of incarcerating someone or the very act of incapacitating someone behind prison walls. We are also talking about the carceral state. And the carceral state is essentially this ever expanded network of punishment, criminalization, and surveillance that we use in the United States across formal social control institutions like that of incarceration, that of like generally corrections, police, courts, that kind of thing, but also how we use it in informal social control institutions like that of education or housing or public service or public welfare. And the importance of understanding the carceral state more broadly is the fact that when we think about incarceration or when we think about the story of our nation, essentially we are thinking generally about how do we criminalize and surveil people generally? What are the kinds of tactics or the kinds of strategies that we use that are multiplied or amplified behind prison walls, but really have already started long before that? So when we investigate or we ask questions about who is incarcerated in this country, who's disproportionately affected or impacted by incarceration, we start to get into who is disproportionately criminalized or surveilled, right? And it's a very important distinction because until we can ask those questions, and Mohammed started to get into this a little bit, but until we ask those broader questions about like who is the person or the people or the population, or what are the strategies or what are these kind of bigger tactics that are being used, we won't really get to understand the importance of the stories that are in front of us every single day. So I want to put that in the space because when I talk about the Black women that I interviewed for my research, those who were under probation and parole during COVID-19, it might seem like slightly out of place because I'm not necessarily talking about incarceration itself, but it is still this extension of social control, right? These are women who were incarcerated at some point. On average, they were incarcerated for 10 years or more, and then came home to still be under some sort of supervision, right? Under probation, under parole, under electronic monitoring, under house arrest, and still had to navigate the kind of system of surveillance, even though they were in their own homes. And the reason why I'm making that distinction is because when we talk about the story of our nation, when we're talking about incarceration, we are also talking about supervision. We are also talking about ways that people are navigating control or navigating surveillance in their everyday lives. So I want to highlight some of the particular stories of these women, and then I want to highlight how we brought those stories together collaboratively. And so Diana talked about the fact that I am a professor, so this comes out of my actual research and scholarship. But I also have been doing arts-based social justice work for over a decade, and I wanted to bring these worlds together. So how can we tell stories? How can we amplify stories in ways that are non-traditional or actually traditional to the people whose stories are being told, but maybe non-traditional to the academy? But then also, how do we expand it and open it up for bigger audiences, to the public, right? So if someone is not going to read a $35 and maybe $100 academic textbook, or if someone is not going to read a 200-page dissertation, how do they still get access? How do they still be able to engage with these stories? And then for the folks whose stories are represented on those pages, how do they still ensure that their stories get spread far and wide and actually come in front of the people who can make a difference? So I am going to just share my screen here and specifically name some stories here from the Black women that I interviewed. And so I want to talk about this idea of storytelling, this idea of ways that the carceral state or incarceration or supervision actually impact people. And so what you see on your screen is just quotes directly from women who participated in this research project, but these are specific stories, and that's why I'm putting them on the screen. These are actual, these are not their real names, of course, but these are actual quotes. These are their words on the page. They're not edited, they're not, you know, altered in any way. These are their stories on the page. And I think one of the beauties about it is that, and I'm not going to read it for you, you can read it for yourself. And there are a couple of bolded places where you might want to draw your attention to. But these women are talking about their experience under supervision, their experience kind of being under surveillance and control, and specifically navigating this broader context, right? So when we see something like access to resources, or in the later slides, you'll see relationships with themselves or with others, or you'll see relationships to systems, or you'll see ways that they are on unsettled territories or eternal landscapes, that kind of thing. You see that this story, or these stories, are much broader than the direct experience itself. These stories weave through all kinds of institutions. They weave through all kinds of experiences. They weave through what it means to re-enter society and not be able to get the resources that you need. They weave through, you know, the streets are being empty. They're coming home during COVID, what it means to be isolated. They're weaving through what it means to be denied housing, even though you've been out of prison for 12 years. It weaves through what it means to always be in this precarious situation of not knowing whether you'll be violated and sent back to prison, on and on and on and on and again. And so I'm putting these stories up here, Shantae, Ryan, and I'll kind of flip through some other stories. Let me do that while I'm, I want to go here. Shifting through relationships to themselves, right? Like thinking about the toll of incarceration, thinking about the toll of supervision, how exhausting it is, how much it's focused on survival, how much it is changing the ways that they move through their lives, being very hyper vigilant in thinking, okay, is this the time, right? Can they just make one mistake and send me back and then apologize for it later, even though they've just destroyed my life? And so these are the stories, as we're talking, all of my colleagues on the line, these are the stories that we need to tell. And these are the stories that humanize the people who are impacted by incarceration and impacted by surveillance and control. When you think about, for all of us, right, we've all experienced COVID-19. And when you think about even the early days of COVID, and you think about the uncertainty and the isolation, and you think about the lockdown, or you think about, depending on where you were geographically and also what kinds of positions you were in terms of your employment, you might not have had the luxury to stay home, right, and work from home. Or you might have been the person who was like, okay, great, my job just totally transitioned online. And when we think about that time, just imagine the uncertainty and anxiety and the heightened, like, what is going on? Am I safe? Is my family safe? That kind of thing. Or what kinds of shifts or adjustments I have to make. And then layer that on with, okay, what would that have looked like for people who were under supervision, or would that have looked like for people who were incarcerated? And that is the beauty of storytelling, because we get to humanize and we get to essentially share this platform that says we too are like one another, right? We too get to understand, like, I was tired or I was exhausted from being on Zoom meetings 5 hours a day. What would that have been like for someone who is under supervision and have to be on those Zoom meetings, else they'll be violated? What is it like to think about, okay, I'm juggling 15,000 responsibilities. I might be a caretaker and my kids are running around in the living room while I'm trying to be on this meeting, and I'm trying to apologize to everybody and say, don't worry about the screens in the background. Like, thinking about ways that we experience these things, and how when we look at these kinds of stories or quotes, we see, okay, wait a minute, like, we can relate to one another. There's something about the human experience of all of this that I get to kind of participate in engaging with or sharing. And so I'm going to exit out of this screen, and I am going to then play a little clip from the documentary that we put together. So after I did these interviews with Black women, and they were from all across the country, but mostly on the East Coast, after I did these interviews, I was really struck by this tension of these women are navigating challenges of supervision, whether that's in housing, whether that's employment, whether that's in mental or physical or emotional health, whether that is in any kind of domain of their life. And while they are navigating these challenges and focused on survival and focused on getting the resources that they needed, they also were exhibiting and displaying resilience over and over. And not just resilience, but resistance over and over. And I was really struck by this idea of resistance, because I'm like, okay, Felicia, how can you reframe for yourself and come out of this kind of deficit-based thinking to think about the autonomy of these women, right? The beauty of, yes, they are navigating these challenges, but they are doing really well in the areas of maintaining their relationships and figuring out how to make meaning for themselves, for their lives outside of these carceral identities. And so I went back to the women and I said, hey, what do y'all think about putting together a collaborative exhibit that will pull your words, right? Pull excerpts from the interviews that you've done with me, and we're going to display them for an audience, like in your own words, for folks to engage with. And not only that, what do you think about actually participating in this exhibit by performing? And what do you, even more than that, what do you think about actually being on a panel so that people can talk to you directly? So they see your words on these plexiglass, but then they're actually able to interact and engage with you directly. And so all of them were like, yeah, let's do it. And so we pulled together, I'm literally taking it out the mud, which was a kind of multi-part visual and performance exhibit that was based on celebrating and honoring the resistance of Black women who were under supervision during COVID-19. And so I'm going to play a really quick clip. You probably won't hear it because I have headphones on, but don't worry, it's just like regular music in the background. You're not missing anything. But I do want you all to be able to see how it is that when we're in this space, obviously there are academics on this line, there are advocates, activists, but how you're able to bring these multiple stories together and multiple formats together. So it is not, for folks who are in the academy that are on the webinar, these are ways, and Kristin and Joss have already talked about it, but these are ways that we can interrupt these kind of traditional modes of scholarship or research. It's ways that we can amplify the voices of those that we are researching, right? It's a way that we can interrupt these power dynamics. Like, yes, we will always be the researcher and research, but how can we muddy those waters, right? How can we still give ownership and power and autonomy to folks' stories and include them in every step of the journey? And this is just one attempt of doing that. So I'm going to play this real quick, and then I'm going to get out of your way. So the shots that you see in the documentary of these kind of walls with the plexiglass, those were how we featured the women's stories or their quotes from their interviews. You would have also seen kind of documents and frames. Those were poems and books directly from the women that they decided that they wanted to kind of donate to the exhibit and have people be able to see. And then the actual exhibit itself was held in Old Town Hall in Delaware of the Delaware Historical Society. And it was beautiful because this was a place where back in the days, even when they were talking and thinking and strategizing about abolition, people like African-American people, like women, like those who were marginalized, couldn't even speak, right, in this actual space, even though they were speaking about their own freedom, right? Like people were strategizing about their own freedom. And so it was just a really interesting dynamic to be able to activate that space in that way and locate it in this kind of larger context of African-American history in Delaware or Wilmington specifically, but also in this larger legacy and context of resistance, of ways that people who are marginalized, specifically Black people, have been able to pull themselves out of the mud in all of these different ways. So all of that to say, I'm super, super happy and super, super honored to be able to participate. And I say participate intentionally, like participate in the storytelling, because I think that it is really important not to center ourselves in the storytelling, but to definitely like take a step back and say, hey, how do we amplify the stories that are already being told? Because as Muhammad has already articulated for us, many of these stories have already been told, right? Have already been said over and over again, and attention hasn't necessarily been drawn to them. So how do we put those stories on a different platform? So yeah, excited about question and answer, and thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much, Felicia, and thank you to all of our panelists tonight. I can, if there's either a raise hand function or people can put a question into the chat and I should be able to see it. Also, I know, panelists might have questions for each other, but I have a number of questions, so I can start us off just thinking about, starting with the first couple of presentations. I was thinking, both T and Muhammad, through CANI, you coordinated so many monitoring visits, and sometimes those are just through, CANI staff doing the work of, completing your usual monitoring visits, but sometimes it's these cases where you're bringing people in, like the monitoring visit, T, that you organized with Jeff to bring people from the community of Auburn into Auburn Correctional Facility and then out for a community dialogue with the Seward House exhibition. So I wondered if you could talk more about that experience and how, like, the feedback you get from bringing community members into correctional facilities, how they describe that experience, the sort of transformative nature. I know I've heard, that from you guys in passing, so I'd love to hear more about how you think it impacts people when they can actually go into a correctional facility.
I got a story to tell. One time we took the Bronx District Attorney Office head district attorney to Attica. He's never been into a prison. He's only been on the other side where he's do the adjudicating and getting people sentenced and sent away. And he always thought that what he was doing was the right thing because he was doing it for a long period of time. When we took him to Attica, and he got to see within the facility the hierarchy of racism, the symbolism that was plainly displayed. He couldn't believe it. He was so shocked that when we left the prison that night to go eat, he had 2 dry martinis. I'm serious. And he couldn't believe that he talked to people that had like 117 years who didn't have a murder. It was a drug case. And he said that no one in his office had ever sentenced somebody to that type of time and wasn't violent. And he was speaking to people from the Bronx, from his community. After that visit, he came back, went to his office, told the district attorney that we got to change the way we do reentry. And we got to change the way how we sentencing people. Because I've been upstate and I've seen and met men who have over 100 years and they didn't kill anyone. This is, it really boggled his mind because he only seen things from one side. And now he know both narratives. But that was an eye-opening, and we always enjoy bringing people from the community inside who ordinarily wouldn't have a chance to go inside. So they can see, they can make their own determination on what they're looking at. And the more people that can see, the more the conversations we can have on this, and then we can really sit down and have a discussion. But if no one see, as you say, if they continue to be in faraway places, far off places and hidden, then we won't be able to have those conversations. And then we will still think everything is all right because we don't see.
I wanted to, it's weird, but most of what Mohammed said, I wanted to say. We just recently had a visit, but let me start off by saying I love when we bring people from the outside with us, the civilian monitors, the volunteers, because I feel that it's important because we are providing insight into what's really happening. People are disconnected. People have busy lives, and at times when you could hear something, a third-party kind of situation, you could read something, but when you hear it and you hear the story, and most stories are similar. The threads are the same. There are family dynamics, there are friendship, there are challenges, and there's certain basic stuff are intertwined in every story that you found. And until you have that dialogue and have that discussion, those things are exposed and bring to the surface. You would never get to see it and feel it the way if you haven't had that experience. So that's one of the reasons that I love the opportunity to bring volunteers to the system, for them to have that experience. And these are life-changing experiences. So the why question is very important when in storytelling, because you're going to read in a piece of paper, you don't know why someone does something that that person did or whatever. And until you ask that question, or until you force yourself to have that dialogue with someone who's incarcerated, until you interview that person, you would never know, and you would have that disconnect, that kind of numbing feeling, because we are being bombarded with different stuff from the media. It's overpowering at times, I believe, and I think Tyrell mentioned this, and we need a counter narrative. We need more incarcerated people to be interviewed, to share their experience, to share their poetry, share their artwork, and a whole host of other things that I know that they're skilled in producing and expressing. So that I hope that answered the question, and I didn't deviate too much.
Can I pose a follow-up? Is that okay? I like, I see Billy's comment in the chat, and I've had transformative encounters and relationships with incarcerated people, and I try to I bring formerly incarcerated folks to class, and I think students wake up and a lot of programming is interrupted. But I'm really curious about from everybody, but particularly Mohammed, like the limits of humanization, right? I mean, like, so you're you were on the ground when Cake started, you were on the ground when the rap campaign started, right? And I'm wondering how this kind of as humanists, right, we want to we want to tell stories where the unfamiliar, where the unfamiliar can be made familiar, also where the familiar can be made unfamiliar. But as like people who are committed to decarceration or abolition, who get cut, who like find ourselves like just mowed down by the buzzsaw of entrenched power structures. I'm wondering how those different experiences met. I mean, this is really really a question for everybody on the call, but particularly for you, Mohammed, like how you, like, is it we just like need better stories and we can defeat the like correctional officers union, like what you experience in Albany? I just want to like wrestle with that. I'd love to hear you wrestle with that.
In the beginning, the group of us, 5, Johnny Perez and a whole Victor, what we did was tell our stories. And we tried to be the example in the beginning of the stories that's forthcoming. And as more people came out, more men and women came out, we encouraged them to tell their story. Even though it's heart-wrenching and some people become really traumatized, you know, reliving that. But it was important that people hear it from individuals who experienced it. And tell it as it is. We don't have to exaggerate because the truth is horrendous enough. So we utilized ourselves at first. And then as time went on and we got more people involved, we got families involved. Families are the #1 advocates in this arena. No one does nothing without families pushing you. And the families have the stories of their loved one. They tell you who their loved one is. They give you the whole historical background, how he was raised or how she was raised. You get to see this person now, not as a number or someone that's incarcerated, but as a part of someone's family. And that's the story I try to convey. This is someone's loved one. This is someone's family member. It's hard because the overwhelming narrative is controlled by correctional staff and their unions. They have big marketing money and they can drown us out, but they can't drown the truth out. They can't drown the sincerity of when someone telling the truth. You don't have to hear it, you can feel it. And that's what we try to really convey, the feeling of humanity, the heartbeat, the connection. That's what we try to let people understand. I'm not the worst of my crime. That has happened, you can't deny that. But as Felicia said, resilience and overcoming and taking accountability has to be recognized. But most people want to continue to help you relive your past and see you as that person in the past. And then we have to always remind them, no one is the same, even after yesterday. So if someone does 10, 20 years, they're not that person who previously committed that crime to come into this condition. Everyone has the capacity to change, but the stories have to convey that. And that's what I try to do, Joshua. You know, it's hard, it's not easy, but I don't give up, you know, really, because when I was inside, this wasn't available. And I wish that I could got my voice heard. And because I couldn't, and it wasn't available, I took it upon myself to be that vehicle for the others. Really. Really. Because, you know, there was no one in the 70s and the 80s that you can call and say, hey, man, they're killing us up in here. Hey, can we get somebody to come and see us? Hey, could somebody write an article about what's going on? None of that. It wasn't the fad at the time. Abolition work and this criminal justice work is somewhat of a fad. But it's life-breaking, life-taking, life-making work. That's what it is. This is my dedication to this work because I wish I had a Terrell Muhammad to call on.
That made me think, Felicia, also about how the decision to sort of frame around resilience, um, in the face of the long grind of resistance against what seem to be, and you know, for people doing historical work, we can observe to be unmoving systems. Um, and I think you were like, Mohammed, you were just modeling what it means to sort of reframe around resilience. And I know that was something you chose in your um, exhibit as well. I mean, yeah, I wondered if Felicia, you had a comment on that question as well.
Yeah, real quick, because I see someone put a question in the chat, so I definitely want us to get to that. But I would say that, you know, there are not only are there multiple stories for us to tell, and not only are there multiple ways to tell those stories, but there are multiple purposes for stories. And so we have to be careful that we don't always uh, restrict or confine the stories to specifically for the purpose of change, right? Like the reality is that we are working in a system that is as old as the United States. We're working in a system that is part and parcel of how we operate as a country and cannot necessarily be uh, distinguished or kind of taken out of the country's bearings. It just is what it is. But the purpose of stories is not always just to get people to change or systems to change. The purpose of stories are to be heard because they matter, right? And so I think that it's really important for us to also recognize, like, for me, like, and I'm doing this work and I'm sitting here, I'm interviewing Black women, I'm a Black woman, I'm hearing the constant, like, oh my gosh, like, how are we doing this? I'm crying, you know, I'm writing memos to myself, like in the interviewing process, I'm writing memos that are like, oh my gosh, I cannot hear another story because what are we doing in this country? And yet I was inspired by the women because they didn't say, well, you know, I've been telling my PO about how, you know, how challenging my experience under supervision has been, and they don't listen to me, so then I'm just going to stop, right? That wasn't the point. The point was for them to say, I want you to know that at the end of the day, I will not kind of participate in my own suffering. Like, I'm going to tell you that this stuff matters to me, that there is something on an alternate universe, or space in which I can exist, in which I can thrive, in which I can survive, and I'm going to tell you my story so that you know that. So I think for me, it's a matter of like letting folks take the lead in telling their own stories and letting me know like the significance and meaning making of those stories, but also not for me to just be amassing those stories for the purpose of like, look, system, look how many people are impacted, change. It's like, no, like for all of the stories that are told, there are millions more that are not told. So how do we just make sure that they keep being told, and for no other purpose than they deserve to be told, because they matter. So that's kind of how I navigate it.
Thank you. I thought I didn't see, you mentioned there was I didn't.
I see a question in the Q&A. Can I maybe jump on?
Oh, please do. Yeah. I was in the wrong.
I don't mean to jump in, but I might have a beginning of a response to it, which is this question from Arta asking about, some of you mentioned undergraduates or grad students work on your projects. What do these students need in terms of understanding context, reflection, et cetera, in order to do this work well or responsibly? And Josh, you should interrupt me or add to what I'm going to say, but I think we're even across every year of the project, we were still figuring it out. I'll add, we certainly did some framing on sort of carceral geography, et cetera, in the class, but I'll also say, like, Josh teaches a class with our colleague Precious Bidell called Incarceration Nation that has like a bigger scaffolding, intellectual scaffolding. So some of the students come to us via having dealt with some of these issues in other classes, but I would say a couple key things. We move slowly. We emphasize process, like the product. I think, Felicia, this is a bit of what I heard, at least in what you were just saying, right? Is like the process is the product in some way. The like telling the stories, hearing the stories is in part like that's the doing of the work, not the, so like we try to, you know, and not to be like a total romantic about it, but we try to like break the like productivity model of the undergraduate experience of like just doing something for a grade, and we try to like really set that aside as much as possible and really center the doing the work and the processing of the work, which I think is really, really important. We also, I said before, we, for our project, have them doing work outside, not inside the walls, because I just wouldn't take undergraduates inside for a variety of reasons, ethically, IRB related, but also just to try to do minimal harm. I mean, one thing I'll also add, so we talked about methods, et cetera, and the ethics like throughout, but I think also one thing we learned early on is that, and this goes to Mohammed's point about this work sort of being a fad, like they know much more now walking in than they did 6 years ago. Some of that is because of the colleagues that we've been lucky to bring to U of R and the other classes that are there. And some of that's just like the world they live in and how they find us and what they're socialized into. I mean, a lot of them are sort of fluent in the language of decarceration or abolition in ways that they weren't 6 or 7 years ago. And that changes the conversation in the room. But we've been struck, and, you know, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, they're pretty good on an analytic of race, and they remain underdeveloped on an analytic of class. And that's really for like private university students or university students from a private university in upstate New York going into these towns, that we sort of tripped over our own feet the first year and had to work with them a lot more on really thinking through sort of the intersectional dynamics about these issues. So all that to just say that I think we move cautiously, and it's part of why we moved to the exhibit, which is more provocation than argument. We don't want them to think that they're going to have answers. We want them to become attuned. I mean, it's a methodological class as much as it's a carceral geography class. We want them to we want them to learn to be good, to be deep listeners and attuned observers and careful questioners, because I think that we believe in that modality of like long-term learning as also being like a piece of the struggle. So those are just a few partial responses. I don't know, Josh, if you have more or others among you.
I'll just say, a couple things, and Felicia, what you said was really, really helpful. And I know that for us, we run this as a kind of ethnography lab, and it's like we don't want to be extractive. This is like a longitudinal, like the yield. Actually, I think about it as like the relationships, and I think our students get that ethos. And to Marta's question, one of the levers that we've had to pull, and like again, we're like the universities are in crisis, and we'll see what the future holds. But like if I don't know if the liberal arts college you teach at, like there's an emphasis on community engaged learning. But so like what we were doing was in some way legible. The institution valued these kind of connections. I'm just thinking about the kind of levers, like the resources there, the kind of levers that you can pull to do this kind of work. And and our students just like I think they had a really good time with it, and we had a really good time with it.
You're muted.
Yeah, I saw Marta replied that she said Skidmore, and there's civic engagement, community co-creation emphases. This panel is sponsored by the Center for Community Engaged Learning at Fordham, which is how I got into contact with Candy to begin with. I thought maybe I want to check to make sure we can capture any final questions, but I did want to ask for, we were already sort of getting into the like what you did to set students up, but maybe if you could describe a little bit more, as you said, the sort of impact maybe not measured in units of change at a policy level, but in the relationships built. And so I wanted to invite everybody to share maybe a little bit more about how the relationships that you think these projects enabled that were were uniquely enabled by your project. So either that students were able to build, that the participants in your exhibition, Jeff or Felicia, the relationships you brought together in your exhibition version of your dissertation, which I love how you talked about, like I can either have a 200 dissertation that's built on the interviews with these women or bring them into a space to engage with audience and co-create something. Anyway, so I just wanted to open it up for people to share kind of the relationships that you saw being built, if either through like feedback you got from students or from community members. or from your participants, co-creators, Felicia. So that's what I thought it'd be good to conclude on.
Is it okay if I go first? I hate to follow, especially Felicia, Muhammad, anybody here really. So I was glad Tina, I got to go first, so we didn't have to follow some of these amazing presentations. I was thinking to Josh's question from earlier, but as a closing thought from Seward House, Canny worked really hard to prepare the dozen or so people that were going to be entering, absolute civilians, many entering for the first time for the monitoring visit. One of the things that I'll say is that I really wish, though it's impossible, that all 30,000 people who live in the city of Auburn could go through what we did. And obviously they can't. Canny is going to come back and we'll take representative samples of people who have different cachet and different pockets of our community who can bring different audiences together. One of the great things about having Josh and Kristin bring their Going Upstate exhibit to Auburn across multiple sites was it did engage audiences that don't tend to want to connect with our museum because it brought us into communities that for whatever reason are hesitant. And I'm talking corrections as well as formerly incarcerated and their family. And the best day, I think, of the last few years of my job at the museum was the opening night and seeing a space created for conversations, people whose lives have been very directly impacted. But to the people who made the first monitoring visit with me, when I see them on the streets of Auburn now, we're different. We make eye contact differently. It's the first thing we talk about. And I think that is just sort of the profound nature of going in and seeing these stories through lived experiences, having these encounters and being able to take away nothing but the stories. And so I'm really grateful that Canny gave us that. I'm looking forward to doing it 2 more times. And I hope that everybody else who we're able to bring in can do the same thing. And that's how, to get to Felicia's point about amplification and magnification, I think we can start to make these real changes that Muhammad's talked about. Again, in a perfect world, all 30,000 people whose lives aren't already entangled, because there's 1,000 who work there. Not everybody needs to go in because they've been or are going. But it is a life-altering thing to do. And so the challenge for us is how to capture that in a story that's meaningful, that's not just empty virtue signaling, but that contributes something that's real and substantial. So I want to thank everybody for inviting the Seward House and inviting me to be a part of this discussion.
And I'll jump in real quick because I also see that we're at time, and I just saw another question come through the Q&A, so I'll just tag team a little bit on that question. But one of the things that I advocate for in my research in particular, and then even in my social justice arts collective, is compensation. I can never fully pay someone for their participation or fully kind of represent that in a monetary kind of value, but I always compensate. And when I say always, I mean not only for the first engagement, but every engagement thereafter. So I did qualitative interviews, I compensated all my participants. I did feedback sessions, I compensated all my participants. For the exhibit, I compensated all the participants. For any kind of Zoom calls or re-exhibits or kind of panel discussions, virtual or in person, I've compensated them. And so what it does is essentially tell them at every step of the way, like, number one, I'm never going to do anything related to your stories without you. So anytime someone comes and says, oh my gosh, like Felicia, you've done such amazing work, like we want to re-exhibit your exhibit, which they did at my alma mater, University of Delaware. Can we do that? I'm like, sure, let me talk to my participants and see if they're down with that. And if they are down with that, how can we make sure that within our budget we have compensation for them, because this is their story, right? This is for them and of them. And so how do we make sure that we're not like benefiting from their stories without also not only compensating them, but bringing them along in every other conversation? And I think for me, it's been, the benefits are kind of open because a lot of them talk about being able to share their stories, and very grateful for being able to have that platform. And then, of course, even in the compensation arena, having a little bit of change to be able to like make ends meet every time they do like engage. And so there are these kind of like open or broad kinds of benefits. And then we work together, and by we, I mean me and the participants that I engage with, we work together collaboratively on developing kind of advocacy or developing policy recommendations. So I literally have an entire section of the dissertation and of the project, where all of the recommendations are literally just from the women themselves, for them to be able to say, this is what we want. And then I literally present it, and I've presented it to supervision officials and supervision departments and that kind of thing, to say, hey, not only have I kind of, pulled this research together, but here are the recommendations directly from the folks who are actually experiencing this. So I think that there are ways to ensure that, again, it's not going to be 100% like, eliminating power dynamics, but I do think that there are ways to put in place or model how we might want to mitigate some of that. And so I think that that's just one version or one aspect.
For me, okay, go ahead, Kristin.
You sure? I would just be really quick and just say that I was just to the relationships end of the question that just came in about, do students do advocacy? Like, yeah, I was going to say that one of the compelling pieces of the relationship building is that students do, not all of them, but often students are mobilized to work with our formerly incarcerated colleagues who are themselves activists and organizers and people that we have become into community with. And students go home and talk to their parents and who work in prisons and push on them in certain kinds of ways. And they, if we can think about sort of theories of social change, they engage in a variety of ways, but absolutely many of them get very motivated to do work, to go to Albany and campaign with Communities Without Cages and with RAP and with other organizations. So I didn't mean to speak over you, Mohammed. You go ahead.
No, I remember, Diane, during COVID, the beginning of COVID, and you had a group of students, and I had a problem because we couldn't get out into the public. Everybody was quarantined, but I wanted to get some stories out. And I remember these young people teaching me the importance of font size, the importance of color, and how you have to have a teaser for them to read, just the teaser, because they don't have a long attention span, but put a link at the end if they want to read further. I learned that from them students in your class during COVID, and it helped me because I'm not a techie person, but they knew exactly what needed to be done. This is why I love young people, because they put me in the 21st century, and I still use that same model today. But if I didn't know it, I'd be antiquated. So I thank your students in that class, that very first class.
Well, and your encouragement of them, I would agree too. Some of these, it's not all of them, but some students go on to pursue advocacy work, or especially those who are like pre-law going into law school to pursue work in this space. And I know they all talk about how impactful Mohammed's interaction and relationship building with them was.
For me, I think about shared experience with, and especially those kind of experience when somebody is coming into a facility for the first time and having that experience, and now that connection is there, it's built, and hopefully people are now taking that experience and moving forward with it to encourage social change, because hopefully they are motivated because of what they have seen and heard and experienced. So for me, that's kind of important, and I would love to continue with that aspect of it, to have more people exposed to carceral storytelling, to understand what's happening behind the walls, from those who are formerly incarcerated and those who are currently incarcerated. I think in addition to what we are doing now, discussion groups within the facilities are important, because even though I am formerly incarcerated, I didn't say it at the beginning, but I was incarcerated for 24 and a half years, and a 25-year sentence. So even though I'm a formerly incarcerated, I don't want to profess to speak for the currently incarcerated population. I would rather bolster their voice, or echo what they are championing and what they have in mind and what they want to say. So I always kind of keep that distinction, speaking for and providing the opportunity for them to speak for themselves. So when we take people inside from the community, we are hoping that they will bring out the voices of those incarcerated people and use those voices and use those stories to kind of motivate others or even ask questions and not being told by society what's happening behind the wall. They know, they hear it now, and they are in a better position to dig and ask question and kind of examine what's really happening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for your time tonight and for your storytelling and your work across, storytelling across so many different domains. Thank attendees for coming, and I'm going to stop the recording now.